Hey Eric, so have you ever had anything that's happened in your past? You know, a past experience, maybe a challenge, some adversity. And I'm not talking about, the past as in yesterday, last week. I'm talking about the distant past.
Yeah.
And you made some decisions along the way. And today, when you look back on that, you can kind of see how those dots were joined and how that paved the way to either put you or to create the person that you became, or to change your circumstances that led to some positive outcome in today.
Yeah, absolutely. And just as you were saying that, certain memories, like really like a multitude of memories came kind of flooding into my mind. Everything from athletic things that I did, early business stuff that I did, just really came crashing into my mind. Not all of them were positive, but some of them were. Some still inspire me to this day, and some can still hinder me to this day. So yeah, super interesting question. I hope that our viewers and listeners maybe had a similar experience listening to you lay that out.
Yeah, for sure. And if they did, it's because you can't join the dots going forward. But
Right.
More on that in a moment. And first, hello, I'm Steve.
And I'm Eric. And together we are two dads with one mission.
Welcome to the 𝗙𝗍𝗶𝗀 podcast. This is the show for dads, all about fatherhood, faith, and freedom, one conversation at a time.
Okay, Steve, so you said something right at the end of that first segment that piqued my curiosity about not being able to join the dots. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I think the easiest way to explain the dots is probably to just tell your story. People who listen to our regular podcast know I love to tell stories. And this is kind of a true story. Some of the facts may not be 100%, so don't hold me to 100% accuracy, but it's about a hero of mine, Steve Jobs. Yeah. So if you know who Steve Jobs is, and for those of you who don't, he was one of the co-founders of Apple originally, and had a second tenure with Apple as the CEO, and brought them out of almost a bankruptcy phase and revived them, resurrected them. But what a lot of people don't know about Steve is when Steve was born, his parents didn't want him, so Steve was put up for adoption.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was put up for adoption, and he very nearly didn't get adopted. And the reason for that is the people who basically were going to adopt him pulled out at the last minute.
Wow.
Okay. And one of the reasons why they pulled out at the last minute is because Steve was born a boy and they really wanted a girl. So they kind of looked down on the list, and the next best couple who were looking to adopt, he almost didn't get adopted because one of the prerequisites from birth mom was, look, I want him to go to a family where the family are going to take him through, college and university and really take his education seriously. But the couple that were next in line, they hadn't graduated college themselves.
Oh, right.
But at the 11th hour, they said, look, whatever it takes, we'll work 2 jobs, 3 jobs, whatever it takes, we'll ensure.
So the adopting parents committed, like made a verbal commitment to.
They made a verbal commitment about whatever it takes. We will make sure that Steve goes through college and graduates.
I've heard a lot of things about Steve Jobs. I'm not familiar with this at all. That's interesting.
Yeah. So they adopted. The adoption finally went through at the 11th hour, but he very nearly didn't get adopted. But anyway, he got adopted and had these wonderful parents, and true to their word, they got him to college. And then a really interesting thing happened at college. So Steve's college was Reed University, and at Reed College rather. And at Reed College, Steve had signed up for various courses. And partway through the first academic year, he dropped out of those courses. But he didn't drop out of college. He didn't drop out of campus. So he hung around with his colleagues and his friends on campus there, and that enabled him to drop in on some of the courses. So at Reed College, they did this wonderful course on calligraphy, and he'd seen all of these fantastic handwritten signs from the calligraphy department across the site. So he used to drop in on the calligraphy classes. Had nothing else better to sit at the back and kind of just jot notes, hang around in those classes. So he dropped out of college, but didn't drop out of campus. And then fast forward a little bit, he obviously was the co-founder along with Steve
Wait,
Wozniak.
what was his interest in calligraphy? Like, that's such a random thing.
That's coming in a moment,
Okay,
Eric, but
cool.
we're not there yet. We're not there yet. So basically, Steve then founded with his good friend Steve Wozniak what became Apple Computers, and they built this first computer in their garage. It became hugely successful, and there's one reason why it became hugely successful, especially in the area of what was called desktop publishing at the time, DTP. Do you want to know what that reason was? Can you have a guess, Eric?
I'm sure it has something to do with calligraphy. I just don't know.
It does. Fonts, because it had all of these typesets and fonts, and there was nothing else on the planet which had the creativity and the flexibility of those fonts and typesets.
Okay, so every other mechanism out there was like in more of just a traditional typewriter typeset or something.
Back in the late 70s, early 80s.
He brought some creative fonts to the world of digital whatever.
Absolutely. So then Apple took off. Obviously, there was various milestones if you know the history of Apple between, but in the simplistic, keeping this story short, Apple took off, and it took off so much that Steve hired a new CEO to do his job, so he could do more strategic stuff, within the business. And so he brought a CEO in, and the CEO did a great job at first, and they saw eye to eye. But as time passed, Steve and the new CEO didn't see things the same. They saw things differently, and they kind of drifted apart. And very, very interesting thing happened. Obviously, there was a bit of a boardroom bust-up, but the board of directors, they sided with the new CEO, and Steve Jobs was actually, outed and fired from his own company. I mean, imagine that, being fired from the company that you co-founded, and we're a major shareholder, being fired from
I do remember that happening. I wasn't paying enough attention to the Apple world to really understand what was going on there.
So then a couple of things happened. So that same year he was fired, he took a couple of employees from Apple, and he founded a new computer, a new technology company called Next, N-E-X-T. And Next had developed some chipsets over a period of time. But he did two things that year. That was the first thing. The second thing he did is he funded a CGI division of what was then Lucasfilm. So funded this computer generated imagery, and eventually that division basically did a self-funded spin-off from Lucasfilm and became Pixar. And Pixar, as you know, had the very first CGI animated feature film, which was Toy Story back in the mid-80s. And Pixar was subsequently acquired by Disney.
Right.
Okay. But then another really interesting thing happened. As all of that's playing out, Apple Computers then acquire Next. So they buy Next because they want access to the chipset. So on the acquisition of obviously Next, Apple themselves are really taking a decline, almost at bankruptcy. They offer Steve the CEO position, which he takes, and he becomes CEO for the second time in his career. And through basically him reviving Apple with his think different strategies, lots of new game-changing, world-changing technology that he brings to the table, which we don't know about then, but was about to be launched, like the iPod, the iPhone. He revolutionized the world. Yeah. But here's the interesting thing, when Steve was fired from Apple, he couldn't join all of those dots going forward. No. But you can join all those dots, now going backwards. Backward, had he not been adopted by, loving parents that said they were committed to getting him through his college education, he might not have ended up at Reed College. Had he have not ended up at Reed College, if he was with a different adopted parents, he might not have come across the calligraphy course. If he hadn't come across the calligraphy course, the first Apple computer may not have had wonderful fonts and become a huge success that enabled him to hire a CEO that caused him to get fired from his own company so that he could go off and do two things: found a new technology company called Next. Something else that happened at this CGI spin-off at Lucasfilm that became Pixar, he met his wife there. So that's where he met his wife, in the same division. And then obviously that became hugely successful. And as a result of the success of Pixar, you know, us dads now at Allied Dads, our children get to watch these fantastic animations that are coming out year after year, which I don't know whether you know much about Pixar stories, but they're written in a way that there is meaning for the kids and meaning for the parents and the dads. It's amazing. There's almost like two stories going
like layers going on.
Yeah, they're fantastic. And then obviously because he then developed this company next, and chipset got acquired by Apple, ended up back in the CEO seat, and literally Apple has changed the world. I think that is undeniable, the fact that it has changed the world.
No question. And it's super interesting.
So you couldn't have joined all those dots going forward though, but we can now see how we join those dots going backwards.
And it's really interesting to me how, I mean, I think every one of those dots was critical, right? Just because he was in the right time, right place, at the right time, that connected, you know, whatever. But, you know, I think about just that font thing and the creativity that gave Apple in that moment in time and set them apart, and how they've really continued to lead in terms of the creative with digital, you know, computers, with computer technology.
Yeah.
And even though Windows in a lot of ways is catching up in terms of its ability, you know, Apple's always going to hold that special place for people that are into like video editing and image editing and things of that nature, because they were just, you know, for decades, really, they were the front runner in creativity. And it started with something as simple as, hey, fonts that don't look like they came from an old school typewriter. You know, that's pretty fascinating. Little things can make such a big difference.
No, indeed. So I guess I'd just like to change direction very quickly, because we try to keep these episodes real bite-sized, and I'm just keeping an eye on the clock.
I don't know that, you know, we can ramble on and tell our own stories. I don't know that it's necessary.
Yeah, what I think
we can just let that, you laid out Steve Jobs, that whole situation really resonates with me. I mean, I've got an adopted child, you know.
Yeah. Well, me too. We both have adopted.
You do. Yeah. And so it's like, man, I think about my own daughter.
Yeah.
And the dots that I'm kind of laying out in front of her now that she doesn't see. Like, I can't predict where those dots are going to go, but I'm being intentional about the things I'm putting in front of her. She doesn't understand that. And I'm just hoping. In fact, I laid down a dot this morning on the way to school. I'm not going to get into that, but I laid down a very specific dot. And I told her, I said, look, you're going to be in your early 20s. And you're going to look back and you're going to think about this thing that I told you. You know, so I do that very intentionally, but it's super interesting.
I mean, I guess where I was going when I said I wanted to change direction, I just wanted to leave our listeners with a thought. And I think you've started to kind of open that new chapter, and I'm hopefully going to close the chapter now. And that's that often people get paralyzed with fear of potentially the outcomes of their actions today.
Absolutely.
So there may be tough decisions that they need to make, and they become paralyzed, and they don't make sometimes a necessary decision today because they want to know how that's going to impact tomorrow, next week, next month, next year. And here's the thing, listeners, you know, you'll never know, you know, how everything is going to go. It's just not the way life works. Life is a process, and you have to live it. So I guess it was to give people this, you know, this experience of not being able to connect all those dots going forward, but just knowing that the decisions you make today and the outcomes in the future will weave in and out and in whatever direction, you know, your life process and your journey dictates. But I guarantee there will be a time in the future, like for Eric and I, and obviously for Steve Jobs, where you'll look back on some major decisions and major, obviously, adversities. I mean, you know, getting fired from Apple, you know, a hugely successful company, and being fired from your own company, you know, what a challenge and an adversity. But some of those challenges and adversities will be really big issues when they occurred, but you can smile as you look back, because you'll know that had that not have happened, this wouldn't have happened. And had that not have happened, you know, this circumstance would not have happened. So, for example, you know, you won't be able to join all the dots going forward about how Eric and I kind of got together and met, but we can join those dots going backwards. And, you know, one of the reasons that this podcast exists today is because those dots, they met in the middle, and Eric and I became introduced to each other, you know, and the rest is history. But that was one of those pinnacle moments when, you know, we couldn't have joined that up until that point. But looking back, I can now join the dots and know how I met Eric and what set of circumstances prior to meeting Eric caused me to be in the right place at the right time for us to get introduced together.
Right. Interesting stuff. Okay. And with all that talk about looking back and all that, our next episode is called Back to the Future. So tune in for that. And where can people reach out to us and what do they need to do next?
Yeah, the usual place. So if you want to reach out to us, maybe suggest some episodes. If anything in this episode or previous episode has resonated with you, you want to dig a little deeper, you want us to expand upon it, you know, suggest a podcast, topic for us, allieddads.com. So go to your favorite browser, allieddads.com. That's how you'll reach us. And you'll find episodes on your favorite streaming channels. Please do hit those, subscribe, those bell buttons. New episodes hit every Thursday. So if you're subscribed, you'll get a notification of new episodes, which is going to hit your airwaves and video waves if you're on our YouTube channel every Thursday.
Perfect. Okay. Let's leave it at that.
See you on the next episode.
Thanks for being here.